how I repeatedly find motivated sellers for fix and flips. The core skill for all real estate investing is the ability to find properties time and time again. You see, most investors quit before finding a deal because they underestimate how many sellers they have to find before one actually is willing to say yes. Or some investors get lucky and one property comes and then they don't have the skill sets to go and find another one. You won't be able to change your long-term financial security until you master finding motivated sellers and able to do that repeatedly time and time again. You see, there's a couple things I'm looking when I'm looking for good investment fix and flips, and one is motivation and second is equity. Because I'm looking for motivation and equity, that's where we can actually do something. Now, the third thing, which isn't a necessity but I really like, is that the property is in need of repairs. If the seller has motivation and the property has equity and the property is in need of repairs, that's the perfect situation that I want to be going after. One of the things you've got to realize is how to estimate the equity in a property and understanding how much that property is worth. You also need to figure out how much the property is owed so that you can determine the equity in that property. One of the things that comes up time and time again is, why would a seller want to sell at a discount? It depends on their situation. If they're having a life-changing circumstance like a bankruptcy or a divorce, or they have it's an out-of-state owner, it's a rental property that just got trashed. When the seller has motivation, it deals with a change of life circumstances, or there's something to do with the property where the property is in bad shape. Most people don't realize that if property is in bad shape, you can't just go down to the local bank and get a loan on the property. Most banks want to make sure the property is in inhabitable and good condition, and as a matter of fact, when the appraisal is done, they're going to check to make sure things are in working order, or at least to the lender's apprise. Now, they're not going to do a full inspection on the property, but they are going to be looking at things, and if the appraiser sees something that's concerning, they're going to call it out, and the lender's not going to move forward with a loan on that property. So then the seller has this property that they need to get rid of. If the seller can't sell it to a traditional home buyer because that home buyer cannot get a loan, then they've got to do one of two things. One, they can fix the property up themselves. They can put the time and money into it. But what if the seller doesn't have that money? Or what if the seller doesn't have that time to fix the property up and needs to be out of it? Well, then they need to sell it to an investor, somebody that can get a hard money loan in purchasing the property. That's what's going to happen here, is if you can find somebody that has a home that's in distress, has motivation, has equity, that's the perfect situation where we can go and actually help someone out. Now, there's a couple of ways that I like to find these types of properties. I'm going to show you my screen here real quick, and we can talk about a few of these. So number one, I like vacant properties. So let's just take, let's just take Chicago, Illinois here. One of the things that I like to look at here is properties that are vacant. You see, if a property is vacant, what that basically means is it's expensive. Because if there's a vacant property, somebody's paying the taxes, somebody's paying the mortgage, somebody's having to deal with the repairs and the snow removal or take care of the grass and those types of things. And so if that's the case, those vacant properties could be good potential investments for us. That could be a situation. But what I've done with vacants is taken it a step further. I primarily like single family houses, so I've sorted for that. And I want to make sure that the property's not listed on the multiple listing service. It's not with an agent. And also I want to make sure it's got some equity. So these have $100,000 worth of equity. They're not listed on the multiple listing. We know that they're single family houses, and we know that they're vacant properties. And so then I can go and market to those guys, make phone calls, send postcards. I can skip trace and get their cell phone number and their email address. So that's one bucket of properties that I like to go after. The next bucket of properties I like to go after is involuntary liens. An involuntary lien is different than voluntary. Voluntary means I signed and said the loan could come on my property. Those are typically mortgages. But an involuntary lien is going to be something that I didn't ask to be put on the property, but they have the right to put it on my property. So let's look at the different types of involuntary liens that are out there. There are tax liens. There's HOA liens, there's mechanics liens, utility liens, solar liens, child support, and other liens. Now let's break all these down. We're talking about involuntary liens here. Now a tax lien, you're pretty familiar. If you don't pay your property taxes, that can turn into a lien, and that lien can eventually do a foreclosure, take the property, sell it so that the tax man can get his money. That's a tax lien, okay? Next one is an HOA lien. This is a homeowners association. The homeowners association is not getting paid, or they're not keeping the property the way that it needs to be, so the HOA starts to foreclose. They would then have to pay off the bank, but that means somebody's going through a distress situation. The next one is mechanics liens. This is where a contractor went out there, did some work on a property, never got paid for any of that work on the property, and has filed a lien to try and recover their money and put that against the property. That's a mechanics lien. Next one we're going to talk about here is a utility lien. A utility means they haven't been paying their water, sewer, garbage, haven't been paying their gas or their electric. Again, all of these are telling us there's something going on with this house. There's something going on with this person. The next one is a solar lien, where they got solar put on the property so that they could get electricity subsidized, and then they don't pay the company that put the solar panels on there, so they're lien the property and say, you need to pay us or we're gonna foreclose and take the property. That's a solar lien. Child support lien is when somebody has to pay the child support, they're not paying that, that becomes a lien on the property so they can try and recover so that child support can be paid for, and other just classifies of any other type of involuntary lien. So what we're talking about here is motivation. We talked about motivation, we talked about equity, and we talked about properties that are in poor condition. So if you think of like these properties that have mechanics liens, those can be a great opportunity. But I like to go after all these different types of properties, but I want to make sure they're not listed with an agent. I want to make sure that they have equity, and I want to make sure with this we're talking about involuntary liens. And that's another bucket of people I like to go after to see if I can help them and in turn do a real estate deal. The next one I'm going to talk about is bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is a tricky one because bankruptcy is a process, so you have to be prepared to go through the process and be willing to do that. But if the property's in need of work and it's got equity and the seller probably has motivation at this point, this can be a great way to go. Now, sometimes the bankruptcy court's gonna have to make an approval for you to purchase the property. You'll have to submit that. That can be a process, but you've got to keep following up on it to make this happen. So when I look at bankruptcies, I look at properties that are not listed on the MLS. I look at single family houses, and if you want duplexes, threeplexes, fourplexes, you can do that, but I typically want single family up to a fourplex. I'm strictly looking at single family in this search. I want properties that are not listed, and I want properties that have at least $100,000 worth of equity. And if you look at this, you can see just a snapshot right now in Chicago, there's 6,892 properties that have bankruptcies, that are single family, that are not listed, and also have equity. Now, you may want to have different filters, and you can come in and play with that and make those. The other thing I forgot to say here is I don't like properties worth over $500,000. So I want to make sure that the property is $500,000 or less, and I also want to make the lien $5,000 or more. Now, you could change this lien amount to be $50 if you wanted to, but I want to make sure it's substantial enough that most people are not going to be able to find a way to come up with that money very easily. And so my rule of thumb of that is basically $5,000. Now, the next bucket of properties I like to go after is out of state owners. If you really think about it, why does somebody own a property and live out of state? Well, the only reason is if it's a second home or it's a property that they are renting as a rental property. Now, I do my best to filter out vacation homes, and the way I filter out vacation homes is make sure that the areas and the neighborhoods that the zip codes I'm going after are not vacation home areas. So like in my area, I live in Utah, there's Park City, Utah. A lot of Park City, Utah has some expensive houses that are owned by people like Will Smith and other famous actors. Well, those are obviously not areas I want to be going after. However, that said, I can typically filter out second homes by putting on a maximum amount. Typically, a lot of those second homes are worth more than $500,000. So if I put $500,000 on my maximum amount, I'm not going to be dealing with second homes, which is nice. That's something I don't want to do. But out-of-state owners have motivation when a tenant moves out, when they ruin the property and they want to get rid of the property. Those are some things that you can be going after as well when we start talking about these out-of-state owners. But again, I want out-of-state owners that have equity, that aren't listed on the MLS. Those are the things that I'm basically going after here. So when we look at these out-of-state owners, there's 11,457 out-of-state owners that have under $500,000, have 30% more equity. So these have $150,000 of equity in them up to. It has an active lien, single family, condo, townhouse. You could also put duplex, threeplex, fourplex if that's something that you actually want to be going after. The next bucket I want to talk about here is non-owner occupied. Different than out-of-state owner, non-owner occupied means the owner lives in the state, but they don't live in that property. They live in the state, but they don't live in the property. So these are typically more landlords that we're going after here. And I like landlord properties because landlords have problems. So non-owner occupied, there are 71,457 non-owner occupied properties right now. These are properties that are under $500,000, that have 30% more of equity, that have a lien for $5,000 or more, and they're a single family condo, row house, and they are not listed on the multiple listing. Right now, there's 11,457 of these. These are people I like to target because sooner or later, lots of people that think they want to be landlords eventually don't want to be landlords, and they want to sell that property. They want to move on. And it typically happens when a tenant goes and destroys the property, and they just don't want to put more money into the property. So when it comes down to marketing to these people and talking to them, it really comes down to timing and time frame. Next one I want to talk about here is pre-foreclosure. Pre-foreclosure is somebody that's going through a notice of sale or a notice of default. So when somebody's going through a foreclosure process, the first thing that happens is they don't make a payment. When they don't make the payment, the bank's going to send out a notice, and they're going to attack them with a 30-day late. If they don't make a second payment, they'll send out another notice, and they're going to attack their credit report with another 60-day late. If this goes on again, they're going to get a 90-day late on their credit report. They're going to get another notice. And soon after that, depending upon the bank, they're going to get a notice of default or a lis pendens. Basically what this is recorded. It's recorded at the county recorders, which means we have access to that. When we can get to the county recorders, we can see that this property has this notice of default or lis pendens, which means there's a problem with this property, which means these people are going to need to do something. This property is going to get foreclosed on. Well, if we can go and help those people and we can buy that property from them so they can get out of it instead of losing everything they have, that can be a great win, especially if that property is one that is in need of some work. So what I like to look at when I'm dealing with these, I like to look at people that are in pre-foreclosure, and the things I like to look at here is under $500,000, notice of default, lis pendens, auctions, and I look at the single family not listed on the multiple listing service. Now you could reverse this and you can actually go after properties that are listed on the multiple listing that have equity and make offers to those as well. That's one of the things that we call MLS sniping, which is a whole other strategy of finding properties as well. It's an easier way to find properties. It's a harder way to get them under contracts. You got to make a lot of offers, and lots of times those agents are not excited to see you making tons of offers, but it is a great strategy for finding property. The next bucket that I want to talk about here is failed listings. Right now there is 10,425 failed listings in Chicago. A failed listing means it was listed on the multiple listing service. The property did not sell, and so the property is unlisted right now. So we had somebody that wanted to sell, and now they don't want to sell. What's going on there? Maybe they still want to sell, but they haven't listed it on with an agent. But I need to take that a step further. You see, I want to make sure if I'm going after unlisted properties, I want to make sure that they've got equity. So the same things, you're going to see the same thing I'm talking about here. 30% more of equity, $500,000 max price. Now you may want to go a little higher. You could make adjustments. Notice of default, lis pendens. Now I want to talk a little bit about the auction here. What happens is the notice of default happens. Once the notice of default or lis pendens is recorded, the next step after the bank waits some time is to do a notice of sale. A notice of sale basically means at a certain date, at a certain time, this property is going to be sold to the highest bidder. Now the highest bidder may be the bank that has the loan, or it may be an individual or company that goes and makes a bid on the property, and the highest bidder will actually win out on that. That means that they are within about 30 to 45 days of their house actually being auctioned. That's a great category to actually go after. And as we talk about this, instead of going after everything, you could go after people that are only on the pre-foreclosure. You can go after properties that are only auction properties. If that's what you want to do, that's going to be a more targeted search, but that can be a great way for you to be able to go after properties that have even higher motivation than what we're dealing with at the moment. Now, we talked a little bit about failed listings and properties that actually weren't listed. So, or they were listed, they didn't sell, and now what's happening to them, that's another group we can go after. So once we talk about these different buckets, what you're trying to do is narrow in. The narrower you get, the less properties there will be. And so you can market to those, you can call those, but there may not be enough volume for you to end up with a deal, because it is going to take a lot of volume for you to end up with a deal. A couple of ways you can go about this. One of the ways you can do this is you can actually do a skip trace. A skip trace is basically a service that gets public information and gets you phone numbers, email addresses, landlines, and cell phones for whatever is humanly public. Now, this isn't public like you can go Google it. It's from credit reports, it's from loan applications, it's from credit card offers. You know those offers when you go to buy something at the store and they're like, do you want 10% off today? All you got to do is sign up for this. What you forget is you're signing up to give your information to anybody who is willing to pay for it. That's one of the ways that these companies make money. But if you do a skip trace, you can get that information, and skip traces are relatively inexpensive. At the time of this recording, they're about 12 cents each. Now, skip traces used to only be reserved for private investigators and that type of thing, attorneys, where they'd hire a private investigator and they'd have to go through these databases or books to find that information. Now, with the computer age and how fast information is here, you can now just do that with a click of a button. You see, for any property, I can hit the skip trace, and about 75 to 80% of the time, I'm going to end up with a hit, which means I got data on that for a property, which is remarkable. Then with that information, I can send an email, I can make a phone call, I can send a text message to these people and see if they might have some interest in selling their home. The other thing that I can do is I can run a postcard campaign. I can send postcards out to these people where I'm not having to make the phone calls. And if I want to send a postcard, I don't even need to spend any money on skip tracing. I can actually just send a postcard just directly. I can just send a postcard out without having to do anything. Now, here's some postcards. I like the smaller postcards. One of the things that we do is we have different templates that you can actually use, and your information is just automatically populated into that with the phone numbers and everything else, so that you can take advantage of this to make that really simple. This is another way that we're talking about finding these properties. When we talk about all this, we have these strategies for finding properties, but the biggest thing is looking for sellers that have equity, that have motivation, and that have something wrong with their property. We look at those based upon change of life circumstances. We look at equity based upon how much is in there versus what the property is actually owed. And I probably should show you how that equity works, because I don't think I showed that to you. So here we're going with some equity properties. Let's just pick any of these. Let's just go for some vacant properties and look at properties that actually have some value. This is a property. I don't know this property. I don't know these people. This property's on State Street in Chicago, and these guys do not have a mortgage. We're estimating the property's worth $118,000, which means there's $118,000 worth of equity because they do not have a mortgage. We can look here and see anything. There's an inter-family transfer. We don't see any mortgage history. So this would be a great property to be going after. It was transferred to a family member, and so it's an inter-family transfer here that just happened in 2011. It's got equity in it. This could be a great one to go after. And so we can look at one more here. Let's just pick this one here. Okay, they estimate owed $56,000. Value of the property is approximately $224,000. Now you still have to do your values and all that type of stuff, which means there's an estimate of $168,000 worth of equity on this property. That's what we're looking at here, guys. These are strategies that you can actually take, and those strategies you can actually go find those properties by creating these buckets and marketing to them. Now, I've got a great video how to nail down fix and flip rehab costs, because that's the next step. After you identify a property, you need to determine how much rehab it's going to be. I have a really simple way to do that, how to be fast and accurate, why you don't need a contractor at that point yet, and my rules of thumb that work for even brand new investors. Check out this video. You're really gonna like it and make it a very profitable day.